I would class myself as someone who is very serious about sound quality with unrealistically high expectations. So it's no small thing to say that the new SA45 from Arcam is their first hi-fi amplifier in a very long time that feels fully built for somebody like me, because on paper it does everything that I could want. It has high quality, high power amplification, it has music streaming, a high quality DAC, a phono stage, a big and beautiful screen. Plus, it has Dirac Live room correction. It has that real advantage. So it ticks so many boxes, but is that enough? When I say the SA45 feels built for someone like me, I'm really not exaggerating, because I remember speaking to somebody from the Arcam team a few years ago, and I told them this is the type of amplifier I really wanted to see from them. And fair play to Arcam, the SA45 is not perfect, but I think it's like a huge step forward in terms of an overall hi-fi product offering compared to the products or the amplifiers that we have seen from them in recent years. And I think that is a great place to start this review, because Arcam also make home AV products, and in the past their streaming room correction hi-fi amplifiers have felt more like two-channel AV products, but the SA45 is not like that. I just felt it was important to clarify this to you straight away, because it might dictate whether you think this Arcam amplifier is for you or not. And it might also be influenced by the outer shell design, which is where Arcam have made huge strides to give us something that not only looks nice, but feels very solidly built and modern, with no odd Wi-Fi aerials on display or anything like that, which, I'll be honest, I really hated about their past designs. And that extends to their new remote control, which is nice to use, even though the buttons are not labelled obvious as to what they all do, but you quickly adjust to it. And this is so much nicer than the giant Arcam remotes of old. So the theme of improved style and modernisation of Arcam amplifiers is apparent here. But none of this I would class as new in 2025. We have seen this already from them. But what is new and very standout is, I think, the aptly classified as huge 8.8-inch screen on the front that is super bright and clear. And I kind of wished I'd asked Arcam for like the maximum screen nits brightness, because it really is very bright, kind of iPhone screen bright, modern ones. So very bright, and I don't mind that at all. It's a very nice part of this amplifier's design. And for some context, a hi-fi product that would probably be classified as having maybe the de facto best screen on the market next to a hi-fi Rose product would be the Eversolo DMP A10. Looking at them next to each other, yes, I didn't have the brightness set exactly the same, so please ignore that. But look at how much bigger the Arcam screen is. It really is a huge screen that offers so much potential, I think. Because firstly, this is a screen that you can actually see at a bit of a distance away, even as, you know, you're getting a little older. And that is obviously the larger text and the album art, not necessarily the smaller text. But having a big screen surely means we are going to get some amazing visuals. And that is where I have two complaints. Firstly is that the screen only has 3 brightness settings that I assume is 100%, 50% and off. And I would have preferred a 75% option or similar, because 100% is mega bright and 50% was a little too dim. But maybe you would be happy with these 3 options and I'm just being overly fussy. Where I have a bigger complaint, and it's mostly with a missed great opportunity. The SA45 is all about giving us the music information, the album cover art, some text, and some other bits of info that, to be honest, I don't really care about. What I would have loved to have seen on a big screen like this, especially this bright, would have been a beautifully designed and animated digital VU meter system, because it would have just been lovely. It would have given audiophiles a wow, look at that. It's bright, it's big, it's amazing. And I feel like it's a missed opportunity, because everybody loves VU meters, even if they're just like a visual nicety. And I have to say that is where brands like Eversolo are doing better than a lot of the hi-fi competition, and other manufacturers should take note of this. Round the back, the Arcam gives us an excellent number of connections, I'm sure helped by its larger overall size. And there are ample digital inputs, including a HDMI EARC input, and a number of analog inputs, including a balanced input, and separate inputs for using the moving magnet or moving coil built-in phono stage, both of which have fixed values only, so take note of this if you use an MC cartridge. The connections that might surprise you are the single-ended and balanced outputs, one set of which is intended for subwoofers. How often do you see balanced outputs for connecting to a subwoofer from a HiFi amplifier? Not very often. And there are a few very important things about the subwoofer implementation that you need to know, and I will explain these to you shortly. The larger size of the SA45 starts to make more sense when you remove its lid and look inside, because it has what I'm calling a 4-tier design with a base layer and 3 different layers sat above it with quite a distance between them. Arcam say the SA45 has fully balanced analog and digital audio signal paths, which is great to know, with there being a very tall and large heatsink across pretty much the whole front of this amplifier, with lots of transistors attached to it, including 2 very large ones. And this is more impressive than I've ever seen from any other Arcam Class G amplifier that I've looked inside before. And it explains the impressive 180 watts into 8 ohms and 300 watts into 4 ohm power capability. Speaking of large, there is a very large toroidal transformer in one corner that is nearly impossible to see, so I assume it is being shielded from the electronics. But you can kind of see it a little better through a vent on the rear. And it's a sizable and heavy transformer. You can tell that just by where the weight is when you pick the SA45 up. And there are just a lot of parts inside this amplifier, literally something everywhere you look. The digital and streaming board, Arcam say, is a new 6-layer design with a ground plane intended to keep noise away from the digital circuits, and it's all being powered from the linear toroidal, except for when it's on standby to keep the energy consumption down. The Arcam uses an ESS Sabre DAC chip used in a balanced configuration, and the chip is not a 9038 or a 9039 that we often see, and I found that very interesting. Arcam have a new radio app that controls the main setup features really, and it's used for firmware updates and similar. And you can control music playback to some degree from this app, but it's not what I call a full integration app, as you can't change the DAC filter modes, for example. And it's not intended for streamed music library control, but you can select radio stations from it, and you use the app to select your different presets and favorites and a few other things. For streaming, the SA45 supports Bluetooth and Airplay and Google Cast, and it's Roon Ready. It supports UPNP for maybe using an excellent music management app like JPlay, but apart from that, it's all about connects. Tidal Connect, Spotify Connect, and Qobuz Connect. And I used the SA45 exclusively with Qobuz Connect and found it to work perfectly. It was 100% rock solid with not one issue over multiple, days of testing at all. So that was fantastic. You have 4 different DAC filter modes to choose between, and I like how these have been graphically represented and the difference is explained for once, although in technical jargon only. The menu system is very simple to use and understand and doesn't need any explanation, with the exception of the choice to engage 1 or 2 subwoofers, as this is not the subwoofer integration that you might be expecting to see, or maybe it is. The subwoofer integration or setup or implementation of the SA45 definitely needs some explaining. The first thing to know is that if you engage the 2 subwoofers, then that will become a sum mono signal. It's not a stereo based signal from the subwoofer outputs. That's the first thing to note. The second thing to note is, and you've seen it, there are no crossover settings on the SA45 at all, which means those subwoofer outputs are essentially just line level outputs, the same as you would see on any HiFi amplifier or preamplifier that has line level outs or subwoofer outs. It's exactly the same. So you might question, why do we need the option to be able to turn them on and off? And that is for using Dirac Live. So Dirac Live sees the correct configuration of speakers and subwoofers that you are using. So you need to be able to turn the subwoofers off if you're not using them, and then select 1 or select 2 for the calibration and correct process. With no subwoofer crossover option in the Arcam, it means to control the bass frequencies you want your subwoofer to play up to, you will need to use the crossover that's built into the subwoofer itself. And that might be a little different to what you're used to, depending on what kind of subwoofer configuration you're using or used to. But I can see the advantage of it. The main disadvantage of this type of setup approach is that it's not possible to high pass your main speakers. So take the bass away from the speakers and give it just to the subwoofer. But I would question why anyone would ever want to do that when you have a good quality, high power amplifier. It's only something that you might want to do if you're using an underpowered amplifier that can't drive your speakers properly. The SA45 costs £4,499, so that is a lot of money, but I understand the price tag given everything that's inside it and everything that it can do, because it is a just add speakers, all in one box, full system really, and that comes with a massive amount of convenience, especially given like it's a high performance one. So who is the SA45 for? Budget allowed, of course. I think for many people it's an amplifier that could suit a lot of different people because it does so much, because it looks so nice, because it doesn't generate a crazy amount of heat. It has HDMI EARC, so it can easily be part of like a TV, home TV entertainment system. I think it could fit into like normal furniture, size allowed, of course, because it doesn't generate a crazy amount of heat. So it has a lot of flexibility in that regard. Plus it has Dirac live room correction. That really gives it, I think, an edge because it puts it into like a very small kind of niche set of amplifiers in terms of offering that huge advantage. And it is an advantage that should not be overlooked. For sound quality, I did all my initial listening testing using the SA45 in its entirety. So using it as a streaming DAC and amplifier, driving some pretty high-end, very high quality speakers that you can see behind me there, the Audio Solutions Figaro M2 speakers. I used its built-in phono stage and listened to a number of records, one of them being, a bit of an audiophile HiFi show classic that I'd kind of forgotten about a little bit, but this is a really good album that feels very familiar, but actually feels really quite fresh when you haven't listened to it for a long time. And the reason why this is important is because having an album like this, I was able to do some listening comparisons between vinyl and then listening to the same songs streamed through the SA45. And it's always interesting to do comparisons like that. What kind of differences in sound are there or are there not? And the character of the Arcam as a streaming DAC and amplifier was really quite easy for me to hear and identify, mostly because there was a familiar Arcam vibe that I'm very used to about its sound, but it also had a bit of a fresh new vibe to it that did take me a while to adapt to. The SA45 is a very open sounding, a very clear, a very precisely and well organised and layered soundstage superstar in a way for a streaming amplifier around this kind of money. The soundstage you get off it is really very impressive. It was able to make the Figaro speakers that are demanding speakers image fantastically well, especially for like the depth. And by depth, I mean it's the music that can come or sounds like it's coming from behind the speakers when an album is recorded and mastered and put together, to be good in that regard. Like some Ray Chen modern violin or the layered piano in Gypsy Woman by Levi Scott. The sound staging from the Arcam was really very impressive and much better than I expected. And I think that is a sign of a very low overall digital and amplifier noise floor. And interestingly, the SA45 had a mixture of quite a lively and crisp sounding treble. So it was clear and crisp and detailed and really quite sparkly. And the reason that was interesting is because it also had like a familiar Arcam vibe, which I would describe as slightly more easygoing, slightly more laid back sound. So the music was always what I class as a you go to the soundstage rather than it kind of coming at you or coming to you type of music presentation. And that means maybe it's not the most exciting or intense sounding amplifier for rock music or really intense music, but it also means it's quite easygoing to listen to as well. And that When the music presentation is like that, I find myself, I do creep the volume up just a bit more to try and, make things a little more exciting, but you don't get any listening fatigue when you do that. So there's no deterrent for, listening again, more listening sessions the next day and the day after. And that is, I think, very important. Lower listening volumes was okay too, especially with the crisper treble, because with some worse produced music at very loud volumes, I found that it could be a little bit too hot. But I also know that is because of the speakers and how they play with some amps. So it was a little bit of both, or the synergy of both, that I was hearing here. The bass was very nicely controlled and quite full sounding in the main, and I liked that. And probably the best compliment I can pay the bass was that it was not dry like how some Class D amps sound. The bass was maybe just a smidgen thick, which Arcam owners might be familiar with and recognise. And I really don't mind that at all, because I find it just maybe rounds off bass notes just a little bit to make them sound, I think, a little bit more pleasing, and it can give, especially like electronic or maybe reggae music, just a bit more of a nicer, more rounded, more bouncy type of vibe than kind of very articulate, what I class as more dry bass. It maybe sounds more articulate when it's dry, but it can be a little bit kind of just flat, I find. So we're talking about a small difference here, and it really is only a little bit with the SA45. And I think Arcam amplifiers I've listened to in the past have definitely sounded thicker. So again, it's just a little bit here, but I really don't mind that at all. It balances things out nicely. The vocals had a nice presence about them, which was really good considering the more laid back or set back overall presentation. They did have a nice tone and a nice timbre as part of an overall clean and spacious music presentation. I wouldn't have minded a bit more fullness and solidity to the sound, but apart from that, there was not too much to complain about. And I think it's interesting speaking about wanting a bit more like fullness and solidity to the sound, because that was really easy, or would have been really easy to add to the presentation. All I would have needed to do is connect the Rel S850 subwoofer that you've seen in the shot. So obviously wasn't using that at the time, and that would have added that would have been a really nice addition to the system and worked perfectly with the SA45. Or I could have used, or did use actually, Dirac Live Room Correction, and I'll speak about that shortly. Listening to records through the built-in moving coil phono stage sounded quite a bit better than I expected, and everything I've said about the SA45's general sound quality was all still true, with there being just a little bit more character to the music from vinyl, which is why I enjoy listening to records. Being critical of the phono stage, I did find it maybe just a little matter-of-fact sounding. So maybe didn't have like the lovely kind of vibey flow that I'm used to from a much more expensive valve-based phono stage. So look, take that for what it is. But it did make me think, because I'm using a high-end moving coil cartridge, I wondered if I might have got a better overall result using a step-up transformer and the moving magnet input, because I have tested this in the past with some great results. So this is definitely something to think about. I think one of the best features of the SA45 is its inclusion of Dirac Live Room Correction, because it puts it in like a very small group of HiFi amplifiers that offer this type of benefit or feature. And it is a really big feature, because I think Dirac Live is one of the only room correction solutions that I think is usable for a high-end hi-fi system. And in 2025, Dirac has 3 product offerings, and the SA45 only offers one of them, and that is room correction. There is no bass control for subwoofers, and not the very best offering of ART. For measuring, Arcam include a puck-style microphone with a USB-C cable for it, and I'm sure it is fine. But I instead used a mini DSP UMIC 2 microphone, because it's a high-quality, calibrated microphone, and the measurements you take do matter. And I already owned the UMIC, and I know that it's an ideal microphone to use. I want to say I've seen many things said about Dirac Live, sometimes from other professionals in the industry, and it's not always complimentary, or they mention like limitations of how you can use it, and I've never understood that, because it just makes me think those people don't really know how best to use it, because within about an hour and a half, I had the system fully measured, I'd tweaked the target curve a few times, and I'd been able to achieve a night and day better sound quality. No exaggeration, night and day better sound. And The amazing thing about that is I hadn't touched anything, I hadn't moved anything, and I hadn't spent a single penny, and I was able to achieve night and day better sound quality for the full frequency spectrum from about 25 hertz up to about 16 kilohertz. I don't generally correct above that because the ears are not what they used to be. And to explain night and day better, I was able to get a more full and solid sound with a more evenly balanced and solid and punchy bass, much more to my taste, but without losing any soundstage clarity or space. Actually, I'd improved the sound in those areas too. The vocals sounded more tonally full and solid, and the treble was now even clearer. And that was just because there was a better overall balance of sound in the room. So the room was doing kind of less to mess up or unbalance and uneven the sound. So the system didn't really change its character. It didn't sound like different speakers or different music. It was just a better balanced version of it in the room. Better to my taste and I think better to most people, but it really is about taste. You sit and control the sound. You manage the sound with Dirac Live to be balanced exactly how you like it. And that is within reason, of course, but that is why it's such a powerful and big advantage. And we're talking about doing this in a fully acoustically treated listening room with over 50 professional acoustic treatments in here. So it's a very powerful solution. And Arcam's implementation of Dirac in the SA45 is actually one of the best I've played with for a while, because it was very fast to load the calibrations onto the unit, and that made the whole process feel a lot faster and slicker. And anybody that's used older Arcams will know this has not always been the case. With one tip being, once you've adjusted your target curves and you've loaded them onto the Arcam, yes, you can listen to them with the software still enabled, but I would close the Dirac software because it does seem to just take over or control the levels a little bit. So just turn the software off, and that's best when you want to critically assess your calibration skills. Coming back to vinyl for a second, it is possible to use the phono stages or any of the analog inputs and send that signal through digital, through Dirac Live if you want to. And I know some people might turn their noses up at that, but depending on the quality of the calibration and what you've done with it, it might still sound better. So it's worth giving it a try. I know the thought of putting analog through digital makes some vinyl purists a bit sick in their own mouth. So for those of you, I'm just joking, for those of you who feel like that, the analog inputs and the phono stages automatically fully bypass all of the digital circuitry, so they stay purely analog until you engage Dirac Live. So that is really useful and good to know. Arcam confirmed that. With my exceptionally good Dirac Live calibration and the Arcam sounding the best it possibly can with the speakers in the system, it was interesting to see how that was going to compare to other amplifier offerings around the same kind of money. The ideal like-for-like comparison would have been with the NAD M33, because I think that is the amplifier that Arcam are looking to beat with the SA45, and that would have been a brilliant comparison, but sadly I don't have one here. I couldn't do it for you, so I do apologize for that. But I have calibrated a number of them. I've also had the M66 and M23 here in the recent past, so I know the NAD products really well and the sound character and quality, what they're looking to achieve with them. And I think NAD are looking for their hi-fi products to sound very clean, clear and precise. And that can be great with some speakers, but it can also end up sounding leaner and I think a little tonally undernourished with other speakers. And the Arcam is like this to a degree as well. However, I think it balances it a little better with a slightly warmer tonality, but with some trade-off to bass control. So it's a pros and cons situation as always. And I think, given everything I've heard from NAD's products and the SA45, that I would prefer the Arcam for how it sounds, and it's generally slightly warmer tonality, but do take that with a massive pinch of salt because again, I don't have both here. But I was more interested to see how the Arcam would stack up to the Eversolo A10F10 pairing that I do have here. And yes, you are looking at about £1,000 more for the Eversolos, and you need more cables and more space, and you don't get Dirac Live room correction, which is a real shame, as Eversolo's room correction that I'm putting in inverted commas is very mediocre at best by comparison, and that is me being kind about it because it's not a solution I would ever use. But it makes for a really interesting listening comparison because the Eversolo pairing sound quality, overall sound, massively contrasts the Arcam. It's like night and day different because it's very bold, very heavy, very like full and very solid in the room. Very like a lot warmer and thicker and more bold and solid, and that is instantly like very pleasing. It's like a very pleasing overall sound. It's really just really kind of weighty, and it makes it feel or sound really quite powerful. That's the initial impression, but you soon realize it's actually quite a lot darker, like the treble's much more toned down, and what you don't get is that same kind of openness and spaciousness and kind of precision to the soundstage. The Eversolo pairing, it all feels like kind of like more in the middle of the sound, like less open and less spacious. And that makes it sound worse. And it is worse in that regard, but really it's more different. It's just a different way to present music. And this is where like pairings with speakers and preferences really come in, because I actually, in the main, possibly preferred the Eversolo pairing because I like a bold, solid, full sound, especially with the Figaro speakers. I think it works nicely with them, but I was missing the Arcam's like precision, its space, its detail, its articulation of the music. The Eversolo, it's a little bit more kind of as one rather than nicely spaced out. And I was definitely missing the benefit of Dirac Live and what I'd done with that in terms of balancing the system out really nicely. So again, like it's a pros and cons difference. But I do think this comparison showed to me that there are some sonic compromises for having everything in the one box compared to the two box, and that could be useful for people to know. However, if you prefer a sound with more clarity, more precision and more openness and maybe clear details, well then you might prefer the Arcam, saving £1,000 in your pocket, also having the benefit of more convenience and a phono stage too. So that is also important for people to know. I also intended to compare the Arcam to the even more expensive and excellent Canor Audio Virtus A3 integrated amplifier because it has more of a similar sound profile to the Arcam, and I wanted to see how it compared to an amp that costs about 40% more. But after listening to it compared to the Eversolo, that didn't really feel like a sensible comparison in the end, because I'd already learned enough about the SA45's maybe good and less good points to be able to sum things up for you. And look, to answer like the thumbnail or the title of this video, do I think the SA45 is the best hi-fi streaming room correction amplifier in 2025? And I think it makes a very compelling argument for itself that that would be true. It's a very solid performing amplifier in pretty much every regard. It's not perfect, but it's a very solid performer, and it's a far more satisfying in every regard Arcam amplifier to live with than anything I've seen from them, I think, since I started this channel. So that is really fantastic. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. I hope you found it useful and helpful. I appreciate it's been long, but a product like this requires it and demands it. If you've enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button and of course, subscribe to see more.